Hey everybody, welcome to Narrative Live. It's so good to be with you tonight. At 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, it's always a good conversation we have. And tonight we've got Glenn Kirschner with us, who's the brilliant federal prosecutor, former federal prosecutor, current host of the podcast Justice Matters, and also a former assistant U.S. attorney at the D.C. U.S. office. Hi Glenn, how are you? Great to have you on the show tonight.
Hey Zev, how are you? Hey, before you start, can I give props to your graphics people? Because every time I join you and you do your intro graphics, I feel like I'm in a Stanley Kubrick film. It's like very immersive and inspirational.
I try to
very
get you
cool.
in the mood. I am the graphics people,
good.
so you're giving the props to me. But thank you. I appreciate you. have a huge team here of one. Sandi Bachom will be joining us a little bit later on. She's the independent journalist who covers a lot of the things related to the extreme right, and she was at the January 6th insurrection, so she's got great insights. But the first part of the show tonight is all about looking at this incredible interview that we saw in 60 Minutes the other day with Michael Sherwin, who's the prosecutor in charge of this investigation into January the 6th. And it is quite interesting that he did a 60 Minutes interview. It sort of feels like it's not really part of protocol. And he might have even broken protocol and caught the Biden White House by surprise. Glenn, what was your take on that interview?
So for a former career federal prosecutor, it was absolutely bizarre, because we operate under what's called the U.S. Attorney's Manual. That's kind of our Bible. It's the care and feeding of federal prosecutors, the do's and don'ts. Yeah. And it says in no uncertain terms, and this is the subject of my last two YouTube videos, that the Department of Justice prosecutors' employees do not make comments publicly, do not speak with the media about ongoing investigations, with a couple of exceptions, the most notable being if the United States attorney in your jurisdiction or the assistant attorney general, one of the bigwigs at the Department of Justice, gives you advanced approval. Well, what did we learn today? He had no approval, and yet he ran his mouth on 60 Minutes talking about the ongoing investigation, the nature of the evidence that the prosecutors have, and frankly, more importantly, don't have, which I'd really like to know if I was an insurrectionist. Then he started predicting potential future charges of sedition. Now, Zev, I don't necessarily disagree with many of his factual assertions, but it was absolutely improper, unethical, and inappropriate for him to go rogue like that without departmental approval and start to throw all these bombs into the public square. You're already seeing one judge, Judge Mehta, ordering all of the attorneys in the Proud Boy cases to appear before him, I think virtually, to talk about the latest public comments made in this case. That spells trouble. It may not lead to any relief to these particular defendants, but it's a really bad look to go rogue in one of the most consequential criminal investigations of our time and perhaps of all time, an insurrection, an attempted overthrow of the federal government.
Now, he actually was put in place there by the Trump administration, right? He was reporting to Bill Barr, presumably, and he is he's a Trumpite, really. That's basically what we're talking about. And yet here he is going on 60 Minutes. It seems to me like he was basically blowing up the case because he is basically making it a lot harder to prosecute the case. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what his intent was. I don't know if it's an ego as big as All Outdoors. I don't know if it's a terminal case of hubris. I don't know if he's just getting ready to try to sell his story because he left the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. First, and you're exactly right, Zev, he was a Bill Barr, Donald Trump acolyte. I think he caught Trump's attention by prosecuting a trespass case at Mar-a-Lago. Go figure. I guess that's what makes somebody qualified to be the top prosecutor.
Wait, so he was the prosecutor in the same district that Donald Trump is an owner of Mar-a-Lago?
He was at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida. So, yes, and remember, after he was installed, what did he do? He worked mightily to ensure that Mike Flynn's criminal case got dismissed, doing a favor, though, for Donald Trump's criminal associate, Mike Flynn. So he is not to be trusted. And I think it's interesting that the minute Joe Biden took office, one of the things he went about doing is pushing Michael Sherwin out of the acting U.S. attorney job in D.C. and installing somebody, Channing Phillips, who was a colleague of mine for decades and is a wonderful, ethical, honest, straight up prosecutor. So, hey, I'm glad Channing Phillips is now there heading up the insurrection investigation. But I am stunned that Michael Sherwin kind of tried to blow up the case the way he did by making unauthorized statements to the media.
I've got a few clips. I want to play one of them, and then we'll come back on the other side and talk about what he says here.
Of those 400 cases, the majority of those, 80, 85%, maybe even 90, you have individuals both inside and outside the Capitol that breached the Capitol, trespassed. You also have individuals, roughly over 100, that we've charged with assaulting federal officers and local police officers. The 10% of the cases, I'll call the more complex conspiracy cases, where we do have evidence, it's in the public record, where individual militia groups from different facets, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, Proud Boys, did have a plan, we don't know what the full plan is, to come to D.C., organize and breach the Capitol in some manner.
He does make a distinction there between the 10% and the 90%, right? He's already making a distinction between these two groups of people who showed up at January the 6th. And he seems to say, you know, yes, these guys may have had a plan, but then later on we'll hear him make a bit of an excuse for them as he's sort of separating them from everybody else. Is that what he's doing?
I don't know what he's trying to accomplish. I will tell you, in my heart, I think what he was doing was trying to sell Michael Sherwin and trying to land some kind of a gig when he inevitably leaves government. Now, it's been reported that even though he left the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, he's trying to go home again to the Miami U.S. Attorney's Office. I'd be surprised if they'd have him, only because I am pretty sure there is already a referral of Michael Sherwin to the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility. When there is an allegation of a federal prosecutor engaging in possible misconduct, instantly that gets referred to OPR for an investigation and sanctions if appropriate. He should be also, in my opinion, because he blatantly violated the rules of the Department of Justice, just blatantly. So he should also be referred to his own state bar, wherever he is admitted to practice law. And just so your listeners, your viewers know, before we become federal prosecutors, we must pass one state bar exam and be admitted to the practice of law in at least one state. Then we can prosecute nationwide as federal prosecutors. He needs to be referred to both the DOJ OPR and to his state bar for an investigation and, if appropriate, sanctions, because, you know, it was just so far out of bounds what he did, and he knew it. And every current and former federal prosecutor knows it as well.
He mentioned three different groups there, but he did not mention anyone on this slide here. He did not mention any of the people that I think are the real organizers of this entire January the 6th event. In all our investigation, you know, it's been Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, and Alex Jones, certainly, who have carried the biggest weight here in terms of organizing it and getting it together. And then, you know, Steve Bannon played a role. Certainly yesterday, Sidney Powell admitted through her lawyer that she played a role because she said she lied about all those cheating allegations she made. And then Rudy Giuliani joined her. And then, of course, Ali Alexander was the organizer of the Stop the Steal event. He didn't get mentioned either. Are we led to believe that none of these people are going to get prosecuted by the U.S. DOJ?
So I am loath to open my comments with something like, in Michael Sherwin's defense, because what he did was indefensible. But you know what? If there is any little bit of good news, it's that he didn't start gratuitously throwing other names into the mix that have not surfaced in the public reporting. I'll give him credit, if only for sticking by and large to the public reporting. But he should not have confirmed that they're investigating Donald Trump, because there have been no public charges brought against Donald Trump. And one of the rules is we can't speak publicly about any potential target or defendant who has not been publicly charged. So I'm actually glad he didn't throw all those other names in the mix. That would have been sort of an additional transgression. I don't think we can take away from that all of those people that you just depicted are in the clear. I think they are far from in the clear.
Right. Let's listen to the clip that he said about Donald Trump, because that was interesting too. Let's listen to how he phrased all of this.
Has the role of former President Trump been part of your investigation?
It's unequivocal that Trump was the magnet that brought the people to D.C. on the 6th. Now the question is he criminally culpable for everything that happened during the siege, during the breach? What I can tell you is this, based upon, again, what we see in the public record and what we see in public statements in court. We have plenty of people. We have soccer moms from Ohio that were arrested saying, well, I did this because my president said I had to take back our house. That moves the needle towards that direction. Maybe the president is culpable for those actions, but also you see in the public record too, militia members saying, you know what, we did this because Trump just talks a big game. He's just all talk. We did what he wouldn't do.
The magnet. There's something quite electric about his eyes there. He does seem like he's quite impressed with Donald Trump. And then he goes on to explain, that there are two different ways of attacking this. That there's the soccer moms from Ohio who took the orders, and then he describes what the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers who are being prosecuted under a conspiracy charge, what they have been saying, and he's basically telling Donald Trump what they're saying about him. I mean, that sounds illegal to me.
And none of that provides a defense, because you think about it, he's saying two things. He's saying, one, Donald Trump, in fact, incited the insurrection when it comes to what he refers to as the soccer mom defendants, which is a criminal offense to incite an insurrection. And then there's another more hardcore crew of anti-democratic, wannabe militiamen, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, etc., who were concerned that Donald Trump wasn't forceful and vigorous enough in trying to overthrow the government. So they had to take matters into their own hands. Well, guess what? Neither one of those two things are particularly helpful to Donald Trump. Right. Donald Trump, Zev, has criminal liability for inciting this insurrection. He organized it. He ginned them up. He set the date. There were others who helped transport the prospective insurrectionists to the rally. He then said, here's what I want you to do. Go down the street to the Capitol and stop the steal. He was giving them the direction to go stop what was in progress, which was the certification of the Electoral College count. That is inciting an insurrection. It is also conspiracy to commit sedition. None of this, in my opinion, is a particularly close call on the evidence.
For Trump, you think that it's actually that he's quite clearly should be prosecuted for this?
Give me 3 hours in front of a jury in D.C. and I will get him convicted based on the evidence, a fair assessment of the evidence.
So let's bring in one more thing here then, because he as well, Mr. Sherwin, found himself at the actual event. He was a witness to the whole thing, and not just an accidental witness. He was there behind police lines, apparently in a sweatsuit because he was running or jogging or whatever it was, but he wasn't really. He was just there to take a look at what was going on. And he not only attends the initial part where Trump is talking, but then he follows this group of militia members from the Oath Keepers all the way to the Capitol. So he's a real attached witness to the actual part of the event where there was an insurrection piece of it. So let's take a listen to that last clip. It'll be the last we hear of him, thankfully. And then we'll bring in Sandi Bachom about this as well, because I'm sure she's got some interesting things to say.
Desserts, popcorn, cotton candy, I saw hot dogs. As the morning progressed, I noticed, though, there were some people that weren't the typical, carnival type people. I noticed there were some people in tactical gear. They were tacked up with Kevlar vests. They had the military helmets on. Those individuals, I noticed, left the speeches early.
They headed to the Capitol, and Sherwin walked with them.
You could see it was getting more riled up. You gotta stop us! And more people with bullhorns chanting and yelling. Patriot, go! And it became more aggressive. Where it was initially pro-Trump, it digressed to anti-government, anti-Congress, anti-institutional. And then I eventually saw people climbing the scaffolding.
Look at this! Oh my God!
The scaffolding was being set up for the inauguration. When I saw people climbing up the scaffolding, hanging from it, hanging flags, I was like, this is going bad fast.
It's interesting that he makes a distinction there, Glenn. You know, he sort of says there's a pivot there between the crowd. There's suddenly an anti-government thing. It's no longer a pro-Trump thing. It's like he separated them. We gave him an excuse for doing what they were doing. Sandi, what did you think? Did you think that was what was going on in the ground?
Exactly. Well, first of all, let me tell you what actually happened. This was the third Stop the Steal rally. The first one was the 14th of November, the day after Trump fired everybody in the Pentagon and installed Chris Miller and those guys, right? And there were a lot of MAGAs there. It was like a kind of astounding. We follow these guys. We've been following the Proud Boys for years. I think these were dry runs for what happened on January 6th. And on the 12th of December, that was really violent. When the sun goes down, that's when the trouble starts. And there were 4 stabbings that night involving the Proud Boys, right? And I followed the Proud Boys out to the monument on the 11th of December. They went out to the Washington Monument, and they got down and they prayed, and they were praying for battle. It was like war. It was like that scene in Glory, just before they go off to war. It was something so odd about the prayers, because they're Christians. And then they went to the monument, and then they walked up to towards the Capitol on the Mall. So they took the route that they took that morning. So I think the whole thing was a dry run.
So you think they've planned it before, which means this guy's...
Well, yeah.
When he's saying that there's a change in tone, that suddenly they're anti-government versus just pro-Trump. Do you think that that's a legitimate claim that he's making based on the fact that they've already practiced this a few times before?
Well, if we take a step back, there's actually a bedrock can't be a witness in the case that he is investigating or she is investigating or prosecuting. He's made himself a witness both at the rally and at the attack on the Capitol itself. And not only that, he's talking about his own personal observations, which now become evidence in the investigation and ultimately the case. Anything he said, keep this in mind, Zeb, anything he said that any defendant, any of the 300 or 400 people who have thus far been arrested, any of them want to sponsor as evidence in their defense at trial, he's made himself a trial witness. And a judge, I will tell you, 10 times out of 10 will issue a subpoena to bring Michael Sherwin into the criminal trial and testify on behalf of the insurrectionists because he's an eyewitness, if we believe what he's saying.
Well, we have to believe what he's saying. I mean, what happens now that all these 400 cases that are sitting in front of judges, all the prosecutors are going to say, all the defense attorneys are going to say, hey, listen, the head prosecutor is a witness. We want our case thrown out right now.
Can I say something? So let me tell you what happened that morning and why he's full of shit. So I got to the, not obelisk, what do you call it? The ellipse. Trump is supposed to speak at 11, and I got there at 10, and I saw the Proud Boys coming up, and they were dressed not as Proud Boys, but I know them, and they were going roo-roo, which is a Proud Boy thing, and they met at the Washington Monument, and I filmed them, and all the 3 of the guys that have been indicted for conspiracy were there. Joe Biggs, oh gosh, I can't remember their names. There's 3 guys, and Joe Biggs I had filmed in Portland, because we've been following these guys. So they leave the foot of the Washington Monument at 10:30, and I follow them towards the Capitol, and I get about halfway down in the mall, the Grand Mall, I guess it's called, and I wanted to go back and hear Trump's speech at 11. But when I got back there, it was an hour late. So my friends were at all the breach points, my journalist friends. So
there's 4 breach points, just so everyone is aware. There's 4 breach points. So at least I think there were 4 breach points. And then Trump was an hour late for his speech. So you were sort of stuck outside where Sherwin was.
the fact that he said that they were different people, that's such bullshit. You couldn't tell unless you knew what you were looking for, that there were people dressed in, tactical gear. They weren't actually dressed in that when they left the speech. They weren't dressed in their tactical gear. They changed when they got there into their, they had their bulletproof vests and stuff, but when they left, they just looked like regular Trump supporters, and they had, Trump flags and stuff. But what happened was when I finally got down there, which was about 1, the first breach had already occurred, and that was the the barricades where they pushed the cops. They pushed through the cops, the barricade. The first breach was, I think, 12:58, about 1 o'clock. And I arrived so his observation of all this is based on either he knew the game plan or he studied it. It wasn't from his direct experience, which is he's making it sound like, because when I got there was nobody on the scaffolding. But you couldn't see what was going on where the breach was taking place because there was 30,000 people there. There was no way I could see a few yards away that were my friends. I found out later my friends were there. One of my friends was in the door. The shot of the cop being squashed, that's a friend of mine. We didn't know that was happening, but we saw explosions and we heard, we saw smoke and stuff, but we didn't know what it was. And then the guys on megaphones kept saying, take them, get up on the scaffolding, get up on the scaffolding.
Sandi, I want you to stand by because we're going to talk a little bit more, but Glenn's got to go soon. I just want 2 more questions for you, Glenn, before you run away from us. One is you've got two, you've got the Oath Keepers and you've got the Proud Boys. Those two are conspiracy cases that are developing separately, right? And then the presumption is, at least from my end, the presumption is that we'll end up seeing those two sort of attempt to lead up to Roger Stone, because Roger Stone was the sort of head militia guy for the whole thing and likely was in contact with both the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And he also had, regularly used the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers as security. Here's a picture with him and the Oath Keepers behind him. I mean, he was very intimately aware, especially on the morning of the march, of what they were doing. So I guess I'm curious about whether you think that that's what's going to happen, whether these two conspiracy cases are going to lead to a bigger conspiracy involving Roger Stone.
Now that these Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are facing serious criminal charges, and I predict we're going to see superseding indictments with even more serious criminal charges, including sedition, the Proud Boys ain't going to be so proud, and the Oath Keepers ain't going to keep their oath. They are all going to flip on Roger Stone because none of these people are strong human beings. I'm not trying to be smart alecky or unkind, but if what it takes for you to feel strong is strapping a semi-automatic weapon across your belly and marching around and yelling and belittling, the weak or the marginalized, you're not a strong human being. Your core is not strong. They're going to get pressured by my friends and former colleagues at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. Many of my former homicide prosecutors, when I was chief of homicide, are now taking point on these criminal prosecutions in DC. These Proud Boys, these Oath Keepers are going to break, they're going to flip, and they're going to give up anybody they need to give up to reduce their prison time.
Right. Unless the case is blown up, right? Unless their lawyer goes into court and says, well, Sherwin just blew up our case, let us off, which is a possibility. I also want to talk to you about this exciting project you're involved in, which is the Democracy Pledge, which I think is just a great idea. Why don't you tell our viewers what the Democracy Pledge is and how they can learn more about it?
Sure. So we have a group of people. We call ourselves Team Justice, an all-volunteer group. We do not fundraise. We do not ask for donations, but we try to come up with creative ways to give citizens the opportunity to fully engage in the fight for democracy. One of the things that we're just finishing up is a letter that we drafted to all 50 state attorneys general, CC'd to the governors, urging them with signatories from all 50 states by the thousands, urging them to open criminal investigations into preventable coronavirus deaths. Because as a 22-year homicide prosecutor in DC, of my 30 years as a prosecutor, I can tell you there is homicide liability for what Trump and Kirschner and Pence and the others did to the American people. So that's one project we're just finishing up. The other one that we've just launched is the Democracy Pledge. And all it is asking corporations, companies, and businesses to take a stand in favor of democracy. It's kind of like asking people not to kick puppies, right? It shouldn't be a heavy lift. And once the companies, the businesses, and the corporations decide if they want to stand with democracy or they want to stand against democracy by supporting, the Ted Cruzes and the Josh Hawleys of the world, the Ron Johnsons, then the consumers, I think, ought to know that. So we have a website where we're collecting up this information, asking companies, are they willing to pledge in favor of democracy? If so, we've got their name, their logo. If a person goes to the website, clicks on their logo, it takes them right to the company's website. So consumers can make informed decisions when they're buying sneakers or they want some ice cream, whether they're going to spend their hard-earned dollars on sneaker companies and ice cream makers who support democracy, or if they want to spend it on people who don't support democracy. We're not trying to be heavy-handed. If you go to the website, let me give people the what is it called? The
URL.
Thank you. See, I'm e-competent, Zev. So it's www. It's the D Pledge, the letter D, thedpledge.com. And on Twitter, we're at the D Pledge. And people can go there. It's a very simple, straightforward, intuitive website. And there are 4 sentences where we ask companies to take a stand in favor of democracy. And it's not like our way or the highway. If a company's like, well, we kind of like it, but we'd like to word it in our own way, great. Then we'll put that on the website. This is really about consumer rights because voters' voices are really loud, but for corporate America, consumers' voices are even louder. We're just trying to get fair, accurate information out to the consumer that they can then act on. That is the goal of the Democracy Pledge.
And it's not
the D Pledge.
The dpledge.com, right?
Yes.
And it's not about being Democrat or being Republican. No. This is not a party thing. It's about whether you support democracy, small d democracy, not the party. And I think that's important for everyone to realize that, it used to be taken for granted, especially the Republicans. You used to take for granted that they were in favor of democracy. These days, you don't know for sure. But there's certainly a lot of Republicans now and former Republicans who are very much in favor of democracy, and they would want to show their support as well for the D Pledge. So I hope people check it out, and I hope they give it support. And if you're an owner of a company, please sign up for the D Pledge. It's a great way to connect with your consumers in a meaningful way. So that's a great idea. Both your ideas are really good, Glenn. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you, Zev. Appreciate it.
And people can check out your podcast, Justice Matters, wherever you get your podcasts. And hopefully we'll see you
on YouTube, there's a new video every day on my channel, Justice Matters. And, we're an all-volunteer outfit. So if anybody wants to come over to patreon.com and support our all-volunteer efforts, you're welcome to do that. But one way or another, we are still banging out a legal video every single day, trying to break down in layman's terms what the heck is going on in our federal government, now in our former federal government with Trump and company, and what the legal issues of the day really mean. Put them in context, break them down, and give people information they can use.
And the Patreon address is it under your name or is it under Justice Matters?
Under my name, Glenn Kirschner.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks so much, Glenn. Appreciate your time tonight. Hopefully we'll see you again soon on the show. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ev. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay. Let's get Sandy back in here. Hey, Sandy.
Okay.
Boy, was I blown away by some of that interesting detail that Glenn gave us about how compromising the situation is now that Sherwin has basically blown up the case, it sounds like, for many of these people. That's really kind of stunning, but not really when you think about the Trumps.
I wanted to say something about Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn, and Ali Alexander, all these right-wing people that were involved in all 3 of these rallies. All 3 rallies had the same organizers and the same, they're all there. Bannon is a mystery character, but
he's more involved in the strategy, I think.
Yeah, but he warned the day before that something huge was going to happen. Yeah. He warned that, I don't know the exact wording of it. Roger Stone, these people spoke. Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Alex Jones, I filmed those guys, and Rudy spoke at the Ellipse. that day.
This
And
is really,
Ali
this is the
Alexander spoke
crowd.
to all them.
This is the crowd that did it
Yeah, this
all.
is the in-crowd.
You know, Michael Flynn, maybe Eric Prince needs to be on here somewhere. Well, I don't know if he was in the city.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, I'm sorry, because it's something Glenn said really hit me. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers, those are the soldiers. That's the army.
Mm-hmm.
But their channel was called Boots on the Ground. They had some kind of special way. You couldn't get a cell signal there at all, or I would have found out more that was going on. I didn't find out till I got back to my hotel. But they had a special channel of a special app, and it was called Boots on the Ground. They were taking orders from the generals. Who were the generals? Well, we think that it's at least Michael Flynn and Roger Stone.
Right.
And you're right, or he's right about these guys flipping. I mean, these guys aren't, I don't want to say they're not smart enough, but they're not strategically. This was a huge military operation.
It really was. It really was.
It was to like stopwatch.
And then we saw in the indictments yesterday for the Proud Boys, these guys had radios with them, these Chinese-made radios that they were communicating with each other, which means not only was there a plan, they were executing a plan in a coordinated effort. So when we talk about 4 breach points, there were 4 breach points based on instructions and coordination that they were conducting over these walkie-talkies. It wasn't just some random, hey, I'll meet you on the other side when we're done. No, this was a coordinated effort. We know, for example, that there was, an early group of people that went to the east. There were two big approaches, one from the east side and one from the west side. That's a little confusing because on this picture here, the west entrance is at the bottom of the picture here. So it's right, in between the Senate chamber and the House of Representatives, and the east entrance is on the other side, sort of at the top.
Yes.
And it seems
I was on the west.
Yeah, you were on the west where we saw that huge crowd, and so was Sherwin on the west. But it seems the first crowd that went in came in from the east side. They came in from the top of this picture, and then they got all the way through and opened the door for the people to come in from the west. Now, there was an early breach on the west side on the barriers, but I'm talking about the building itself. Way that go ahead.
The New York Times has an excellent police communication. I wish I had more times on it, but they talk about the actual breach. The first breach, my understanding of it is I was in the west on the front. I came directly from that, whatever that street is, Pennsylvania Avenue or whatever, Constitution, directly on. And then I saw all these people up on the lawn, and they were tearing down the fences, and they were moving up towards the terrace where the scaffolding was for the inauguration.
Right.
But on the left of that is we saw, when I finally got over there, I finally saw on the left there was explosions, there was red smoke and smoke and people screaming, and I didn't know, and that was that first breach was happening, and that was about 150 or something, I think. I'm really not clear about the times, but the New York Times has got.
I think what happened was, there was the initial barriers were broken first at around noon, and then you see the Proud Boys breaking through that barrier, and then they sort of started making their way up through the scaffolding towards the building. Some people started climbing up the walls on the side, but they couldn't quite get into the doors. It was, according to at least 2 sources that I saw, the doors were opened by people on the inside, and those were people who had come in through the east side doors. So they come in and then they open the doors for the people on the west side. That's a very planned thing.
That was coordinated, and it was coordinated. Actually, CBS Sunday Morning a couple of weeks ago did a really good layout of the military. I hadn't even thought of it like that it was a 4-pronged breach. They described it. So it was like on all sides, right? But where I was as a producer, I had the dress extras, right? I had the visual where I was, with 20,000, I don't know how many people were there.
All the,
and they were just like regular. He was right. Those were like the regular people.
They came in a lot, initial breach was the Proud Boys, and then everyone sort of came in afterwards, or the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, which is why I think the conspiracy charges are being laid against those guys. And then Trump ended his speech because, as you rightly point out, he kept his speech late in order to give them time to sort of
till after the breach.
Yeah, after the
first breach.
So that's really interesting.
And then he said, I'll be with you. And I left early, and I had to go pee, and so I missed the whole thing. And then when I got there, the whole rest of the day, and I still, mind you, I didn't know what was going on at all because I had been separated from my friends, and we usually communicated on our phones, but you couldn't get a signal, so there was no way for us to communicate, and it was pandemonium. And so I just made my way trying to get to where all the people were, which is the first terrace, which is there's scaffolding on either side of this little kind of canyon thing. Mm-hmm. And eventually, a couple of hours later, I finally got it. And plus, I'm scared I'm going to get COVID because nobody was wearing masks. Right. I was wearing goggles, But when I got there, there was blood on the ground. I know.
I saw that video last time you were on. It's really a traumatic thing to actually cover, and I'm sure for the people there, also quite traumatic, especially the Capitol Police, who must have felt just completely. They were holding the line quite well against the initial front of Proud Boys that went in, but then to have to see another 20,000 people coming towards them must have just been terrifying. I mean, it just must have.
Here's what bothers me about. Sherwin's giddy presentation. Yeah. He was so rehearsed as to what happened. But if you were like there on your jogging suit, you didn't know what was going on. You didn't know there were people dressed in tactical gear and you would have had to have been at all those
planning
locations.
Meetings. And the planning meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, which he knew to follow the crowd all the way from the lips all the way to, which is a long way, frankly.
But there was no crowd.
But he started off at the lips, and then he moved all the way to, decided to follow the Oath Keepers all the way to the Capitol. That's a long way to go if you just, I don't know, maybe I'll follow these people. That's sort of like intentional witnessing. He was there to witness it.
He was observing. I think he was there observing legally what kind of trouble they were going to be in.
Could be, and also knowing that he could later destroy the case by being a witness and then finding himself in a conflict of interest situation. I'm also really interested in what happens to these people. People like Ginny Thomas, who clearly was involved in helping execute this as part of the Council for National Policy. Of course, Michael Flynn, we've mentioned before. There's a whole group of people at the CNP that, it blows your mind when you think about how many people from that organization were involved in setting up Stop the Steal. And I had some pictures here, but I don't have them right now. But, look at this graphic here. It'll give you a sense of how many people were involved in just setting this up from this organization, the Council for National Policy. I mean, almost every one of these different organizations had something to do with it. And they're all connected to the CNP. Wow. So that's my other big question is, are we going to see a conspiracy charge involving the CNP as well? And I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that, judging by what Sherwin was saying.
When they had the bin Laden thing and they're all sitting in the room, there had to have been a war room. There had to have been. Right. And who was in that room? General Flynn and his general brothers, right? Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, I don't know, but there had to have been. They were giving directions. At the very least, they were giving directions to people on the bullhorns that kept going until 4:30 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. And then at one point, two fascinating points. One point at 4:10, a guy with a bullhorn read Trump's tweet that he sent at 2:28, saying Mike Pence didn't have the courage, right? And then he spurred them on to keep fighting at 4:10, and then 4:20, a guy says Mayor Bowser wanted to send in the National Guard, but the Defense Department said no, thank you. How did he know that?
Yeah, how would you know something like that? How could you possibly know that unless General Flynn, Charles Flynn, maybe who left the meeting early, the meeting to hold back the Capitol Police from coming to save the Capitol. The National Guard from coming to save the Capitol Police. He left the meeting early. Why did he leave the meeting early? He probably left early to call his brother Mike Flynn and tell him that it's going to be a no-go for the National Guard, or maybe he was going to tell him it's going to be a while for the National Guard. But he probably gave them room. It would be my opinion. And it's just an opinion. It's a hunch of what happened.
Remember the letter from
Yeah.
Chris Miller?
Yeah, same thing.
On the 4th.
4 days before, and we've heard from Chris Miller, but not by a real journalist. The journalist who did it from Vice magazine forgot to ask all the critical questions, so we don't really know. What went on at that meeting, and I'll be really interested to hear exactly what went on. But Sandi, I want to thank you so much. Any last thoughts that you want to share with our crowd about what
I'm
happened?
just convinced that at least Michael Flynn and all the people that spoke at the Freedom thing the night before on the 5th were Roger Stone, Alex Jones, George Papadopoulos, all the people that he pardoned, Mike Flynn. I forget who else, but he pardoned them for something they already did. You can't preempt. I don't believe
you can't do preemptive pardons, and that's what I'm wondering what some of these people are going to find in their back pockets. I should have asked Glenn about that, but I think Mike Flynn had a preemptive pardon, and who knows if Roger Stone does too. We'll find out only once they get prosecuted, but if they get prosecuted.
Yeah. Well, there was a war room. I stake my life on it. There was some kind of command central that will hopefully come out that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were talking to. They weren't doing that all by themselves. They were communicating with somebody giving them orders.
I think that's probably the most critical thing that people really need to take away from today is that, despite what this guy said in 60 Minutes, there is much more of an organization that took control of that event. There's no ways you have the size of control room that we saw Donald Trump in and Donald Trump Jr. in before the event took place, that massive control room built under a tent. And there was not another control room then to also manage the actual storming of the Capitol. Clearly, those people on those walkie-talkies were talking to somebody. It sounds like they were getting very privileged, top secret information from somebody on their walkie-talkies, which they were then sharing on bullhorns. Yes. So if there is a conspiracy charge that ultimately leads to the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers being more than just indicted, actually being sentenced, then you've got to ask the question, who were they talking to? Who were they getting orders from? And we know the Proud Boys that morning were in touch with somebody at the White House. And we know the Oath Keepers was seen by Roger Stone, seen with Roger Stone outside of his hotel that morning. So there was definite communication on that day with both the White House and Roger Stone about what was going on.
And where was Trump? Where was Trump that day? Those 3 hours, where was he?
Yeah, and where was he before? They must have planned this all before. It seems like Alex Jones was in a planning meeting just a few days before, and he was going to lead this march. So if that was happening, Trump would have known because that meeting came out of the White House. So this seems like it was a Trump-produced event.
Yes, absolutely.
And not just something that he was on the stage saying, oh, go ahead. I think he planned every piece of this, and it'll be really interesting to see.
It's for his life. Yeah. For his life. He was fighting for his life.
Yeah.
And that's what I think what's-his-face did too. He's fighting for his life.
It's really amazing that Sherwin was the prosecutor in Miami. That to me is already a red flag because
Flynn and Stone, both of them.
Right.
Both of their cases.
Yeah. But for him to have been a prosecutor in Miami, which is probably the shadiest of attorneys' offices. Because don't forget
Epstein.
Yeah, don't forget Epstein's right up the street there. And then, of course, what was her name? There was she was the attorney general there.
Oh, Pam Bondi.
Pam Bondi was there, and Pam Bondi, not exactly the cleanest of politicians. And I imagine Sherwin must have worked in her office or something like it. So we're sort of seeing the structure of what's going on there. That's the show for tonight. I'm sorry it's abbreviated. Wow. I'm sure it's not quite everything we promised, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot of information out of it. My thanks to Glenn Kirschner. We'll be back on Friday with another edition of Narrative Live. And thank you, Sandi. Thanks for being here tonight. And good night, everybody.
Okay. That was great.
Narrative is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.